So the problem with our app to this point is that if it goes into the background or is someone switches apps, when the app comes back to the foreground, it doesn't update the correct time. So we needed a way to have the app update the time whenever it came back to the foreground. And we saw that the lifecycle event we needed was application will enter the foreground. But since we can't put code, or we shouldn't put code in the app delegate file, we need some way to notify our view controller that the app has entered the foreground. And in fact, Apple and iOS and Swift have a way to do this, and it's through what's called the NS Notification Center. So let's go ahead and open up the Xcode documentation, and let's look at NS Notification Center. And you can see it's an object. You can create a default center, which is what we're going to do. And there are different ways to manage these notification observers. And the one we're going to use is down here a little bit. And it's called, I think I passed it. Add observer selector name object. All these are the different parameters of that method. So we're going to add an observer to our class to listen for that notification. So let's go ahead and do that. So in view_did_load, which means when the view loads, I'm going to take that print statement out. Actually, let me go back to do it on this side. Let me just do that so I can see. Yeah, let me just look at the class. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a notification center or an observer in our view_did_load method. So I'm going to use NS notification center, and I'm going to use the default center class, and I'm going to add an observer. Okay, and add an observer means it's going to listen for those notifications. And I'm going to use the observer selector name object pattern. And you can see that's a lot of arguments or parameters for this method. So I'll hit enter, and the observer is the class doing the observing. And 90% of the time, it's going to be self, which means this view controller. So we'll use self. Selector is the name of the method that is to be run when the notification is received. So when the notification, when this app gets the notification that the view is entered the foreground, it's going to run a method. And we're going to call it update time label. And again, it looks like it's a string because it has the quotes around it, but it's really a method name, and we're going to have to create that method in a second. The name is the name of the notification we want to listen for. And in this case, it's UI application will enter foreground notification. That's a long, long name, but that's the name of the notification we're listening for. And the object, in almost every single time, you're going to use nil. Okay. That would be any other additional object listening for the notification. We're going to leave it as nil. You can see that this method extends very far. We can actually, after each parameter, so after each comma, if I hit enter, it doesn't affect the functionality, but it looks a lot nicer. You can see it automatically indents it for us. So there we have our NS notification center. Whenever the application enters the foreground, this receives notice of it, and it's going to call this update time label method, which we have not yet made. So let's go ahead and write that down now. So we'll do function update time label, and we're going to use this code from view_did_load. So I'll cut that, paste that, and let's actually, I'm going to move this view_did_load or the superclass initialization above my NS notification. Okay, so there's the update time label. Let's go ahead and see if that works. I'm going to run my file on my clock. So right now it says 2:17. Let's go ahead and send the app to the background, Command-Shift-H. And we're going to wait for this menu clock to change. Hopefully it'll just be a minute or less. Okay, so now the time has changed. Let's go ahead and click on our clock. And notice the time does update to the correct time. So that obviously it got the notification called the update time label method. Let's go ahead and stop that from running. Well, what would happen if we used an incorrect selector name? So maybe it was update label instead of update time label. Notice I don't get any compiler warning, so it looks like it's going to run correctly. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, let's go ahead and put in the background. We're going to wait for the time to change. Let's go ahead and bring our app into the foreground. And you notice that there's a crash. Okay? And you can see there's a crash happening to the app delegate. Let's go ahead and stop this. And let's see if we can scroll. It says unrecognized selector sent to the instance. So it did not recognize that selector's name. So you have to make sure that those names and the method name matches up. Let's go ahead and change that back to the correct name, update time label. So that's going to work. And it is always good practice that when you are done with the notification, that we de-initialize it. And what that does is that it's going to remove it from memory so that it doesn't take up more memory on our device. So it's de-init, and we're going to, in this notification center, our default center, we're going to remove the observer from ourself. And again, that's good practice for when your app closes, that it removes that NS notification from memory, so it's not constantly listening for that when it's not needed. So now we've solved the problem of when our app goes from the background to the foreground, the time updates. Well, what happens if we leave our app on for greater than a minute? It's not entering the foreground, so is there a way for that app to update the time without having to quit it and then bring it back, or put it in the background and bring it back into the foreground? And we'll look at that issue in the next video.